Mom?
So I'm a high school dropout. So I see that, and sometimes I have to pinch myself. I'm like, did I really get to be a part of that? So a lot of those campaigns you just saw were really, really transformative for the companies. And I want you to think for a second what a campaign like that would mean to you, what it would mean to your business. So a couple of examples. So Poo-Pouri went from about $7 million in annual sales to about $30 million in annual sales the very next year. Forbes just did an article on Poo-Pouri a couple of months ago, and they're predicting that this year they'll hit $100 million. So crazy growth. Squatty Potty went from about $4 million per year to $30 million per year, and they became a cultural phenomenon now. You know, it's not uncommon on Halloween to see people dressed as unicorns now, or you go to a toy store in New York or wherever you're at, and you're going to find unicorn poop toys and dolls and all sorts of things. Purple mattresses went from 0 to over $100 million in 14 months. They just released their Q4 results from just this last year, and they did $140 million in just one quarter this last year. Lumi is one of our more recent ones. They in 2018 they were a $1.5 million company, and then in 2019 we launched our campaign and they did $23 million, and now this year they're on track to do $36 million. Shapermint is shapewear. It's a shapewear brand, and they went from about 70 million up to about 120 million. So really, really wild results, and very, very life-changing for these entrepreneurs and for these companies. And so as you look across, you know, all of these different brands, you don't see a Nike up here, you don't see an Apple, you don't see a McDonald's. But keep in mind, this has all been within about the past 6 years. So the household brands that you think of, like Nike and Coca-Cola and the others, those household brands take a lot of years to establish themselves in our memories and in our minds the way that they have. And so I would argue that many of these brands are well on their way to becoming those household brand names that we know and remember and trust. And so what I want to talk about today is, you know, as entrepreneurs, we're all starting from the same spot, right? We have great ideas, we have great products, but we live in relative obscurity, right? We need to hear our message, we need people to know about our products, and we need people to remember us, right? And so we all have to travel this path to go from obscurity to becoming a brand, right, that people remember. And so that's what I want to talk about today, is what that path looks like. Now, to start, sometimes I find it really helpful to shift gears and look at another industry to understand our own. So back in 2013, the co-founder of Netflix, Reed Hastings, said, we, as in Netflix, need to become HBO faster than HBO can become Netflix. Now, when he said that, I don't know if he realized how prophetic that statement would be. So it didn't just end up predicting what would happen to Netflix and HBO, but it actually ended up predicting what would happen to the whole entire entertainment industry, pretty much all of Hollywood. So think of it this way. Traditionally, you had these big media companies, and under these media companies, they had two major functions: content and distribution. So for the content, think of the movie studios, right? You name the studio, Sony, MGM, whatever. They create movies and television shows, right? And then they have all their distribution channels. Think CNN, ESPN, movie theaters, all these different ways to distribute that content. Now, these media companies, by having both content and distribution, they're able to capture our attention, right? That's important to them. When they have our attention, they can entertain us, they can sell us stuff, they can convince us of things, they can inspire us. There's all sorts of things they can do with our attention. But along comes Netflix, and stuff starts to change, right? So it kind of upsets the apple cart, because the old media companies, they were used to having both content and distribution, and all of a sudden, all of us, by the hundreds of millions, we all started shifting. And the way that we were consuming content started to change. And this was a scary thing for those old media companies, right? Because they're going, oh man, we're losing half of the puzzle. Half of what it takes to capture attention, we're losing it. And so now this should give you more context on what Reed Hastings said, right? When he said, we need to become HBO faster than HBO can become us. What was he acknowledging? He only has half of the puzzle and he wants the other half, right? And HBO now only has half of the puzzle and they want it. And so essentially he was predicting that an arms race was about to kick off, where the new world, think of Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, and the likes, they have the distribution, but they need the content. And the old world, they have the content, but they need the distribution back. So how does that play out? So as you guys have seen, all these new players, the streamers, they're investing tens of billions of dollars into making content. You've seen it on Netflix, right? It's all the Netflix original stuff. $12 to $15 billion per year is what Netflix is putting into content. Amazon is $8 billion per year. Hulu, $2 billion. Apple hasn't released the number, but we know it's in the billions. YouTube, $2 billion per year. Facebook, $2 billion per year. And the list could probably go on to others as well. So literally tens of billions of dollars are pouring from these new streaming companies into content because they want to control both pieces of the puzzle. They want our attention, right? But the old players, they're not sitting still. HBO has launched a streaming service, Paramount, Disney+, ESPN+, CBS, and the list goes on. They're trying to win back that distribution because they want our attention, right? So this is a massive war that has engulfed all of Hollywood. And it's really kind of cool for us to get to sit on the sidelines and watch that unfold and see how this plays out, right? I would argue that Netflix succeeded on that mission to become HBO faster than HBO could become Netflix. But now I look at it and I'm like, man, maybe they were thinking a little too small. Maybe they should be saying Netflix needs to become Disney before Disney can become Netflix. So it'll be fun to watch how that plays out over the next little while. But what does this mean to us? So like I said, we're at some stage of this path, right? From going from an obscure startup that nobody knows about to becoming a household brand. And what does it take for us to get there? It's the exact same thing that Hollywood is fighting for. It takes attention. When we're able to capture attention, that's when we can educate, it's when we can inspire, it's when we can sell, it's when we can get people to remember who we are. And guess what? The recipe for us is exactly the same recipe that it is for Hollywood, right? Attention equals content plus distribution. Sounds overly simple, but that really is what this is all about. It's content plus distribution. So let's first talk about content. So in the world of advertising, historically, you have these two worlds. You've got direct response and you've got traditional branding. So direct response, think of like the infomercial type stuff, Snuggie, all the as seen on TV, the call this 1-800 number fast while supplies last, that type of advertising. And then over on the traditional branding side, it's more like what you see from Apple and Nike and Coca-Cola and the likes, anything you would see on the Super Bowl, basically. And these two worlds historically hate each other. So if you talk to anyone in the direct response world, they're going to criticize branding. They're going to say things like, oh, it's just so fluffy. You can't measure that stuff. You're not going to get an ROI. You have no idea if this is even working. And then everyone in the branding world are criticizing the infomercial guys, like, oh, that's just so gross. Why would you do that to your brand? You're so pushy. It's just, oh, I need to take a shower. And so they hate each other, and they fail to see, oh wait, there's some advantages to both here. So in the traditional, or in the direct response world, some of the advantages are it's much more cost effective up front. You get a direct ROI on your efforts. It's more predictable. But in the traditional branding world, you're able to make it memorable. You're able to create this positive image that lasts. You can make a brand that stands the test of time. And so I'm going to come back to this in a minute. We're going to talk more about content. But first, let's switch over and talk about distribution for a second. So in my opinion, I really only see two types of distribution. There's distribution you can buy, so think of ads, and there's distribution that you can earn. Now, a lot of people will make the argument that you can also own distribution. You generate your own email list. You quote unquote own that list. But I would argue I put it under the earn distribution, because even when you own an email list, you're always earning the attention of that email list through careful messaging and nurturing of that list. So I like to think of it in just these two camps, buy and earn. And of course, to buy distribution, it takes money, right? No way around that. If you want to buy ads, you have to have the money. To earn distribution, it takes time, right? You've got to create content. You've got to put that content out across all the different channels. There's a lot of what Melanie talked about, and I'll come back to that in just a second. But for an entrepreneur who's just brand new starting out, we usually recommend starting in the buy distribution camp and then gradually moving over to the earn distribution camp as you're able, and I'll show you more about that. So when we're on this journey from startup to household brand, the first thing that we have to accomplish is we have to create an economic engine. What do I mean by that? Basically, you need your first sales coming in the door. Without those sales, nothing else happens. You don't keep the lights on, you don't pay payroll, nothing happens if you don't get those sales coming in the door. And so our goal is to create an engine where we can spend $1 to buy some ads, and then we get back $1.50 in new revenue. Or maybe for your business it's $2 or whatever that number is based on what your business model looks like. But the idea is you put some money in and you get that money back out, you cover your costs, and you're able to reinvest it and go some more. This is a really important stage because it's what allows everything else to follow. So how do we build this economic engine? We think of three distinct tools that we like to use for this. So the first one is our message testing phase. And this is where we use just text ads to find out what is our message that really resonates. How do we connect with people in a way that gets them to swipe their credit card and make a purchase? Then we go on to image architecture testing. And this is where we're layering in the visual images that go along with our message. And so in image architecture testing, we're using banner ads to test through what are the images that resonate. And we break them down by a taxonomy. Do product-based images resonate with our audience? Or do model-based images work? Or is it lifestyle? There's all these different elements that can go into an image, and you need to understand what is the image taxonomy that connects with your audience. Because then you can take both of these learnings and roll them into what we call a learning ad blitz, or for short, we just call them labs. And this is where we go to video, but we go to video in the cheapest, fastest, dirtiest possible way that we can. Because our goal is not to spend a bunch of money here. Our goal is to get a bunch of learnings so that we can understand what resonates. Now, if I had lots of time, I could do a deep dive into this area. But for the purposes of today, I'm going to stay pretty high level. And if you guys want a deeper dive into any one of these, So we have what we call Harmon Brothers University. You can just find it at harmonbrothersuniversity.com, and we have a bunch of different courses, and one of those courses does a deep dive into this stuff. So we can help you on that front if you need it. But for now, I'm going to stay high level. So let me show you an example of an ad that we would use in a learning ad blitz. Now, a couple of things that you're going to notice about it. It's simple, it's short, it's cheap, and it's just focused on one proposition for this particular client. That's it. So notice the goal right here is, so in that particular one, we're just saying, okay, for that product, it's a camera, it's the Wise Cam, there's probably 10 different things we could focus on, right? We could focus on storage capacity, we could focus on image quality, and all these different other things. And so when we build these learning blitz ads, our goal is to say, okay, let's identify all of those different things that we could focus on, and let's make one labs, basically a really cheap ad that focuses on each one, so we can put those out there and learn what actually gets customers to swipe the credit card, what really matters to them. And so in that particular case, you saw it was all about price, right? Wise has a price advantage over their competitors, and so we want to test what happens when we focus in on price. And then through doing that testing, we're able to identify what are the different selling propositions that matter to customers, and then we can take that into the next stage. So through those, we kind of do a rinse and repeat on that through message testing, the image architecture testing, and then the labs. You rinse and repeat until you figure out that economic engine to where you can spend $1 and get back $1.50. And then once you have that economic engine, you're like, okay, cool, now it's time to start to scale this up, which that's the next piece. How do we, once we have those sales coming in the door, how do we start to scale that up? So we use what we call Harmon Brothers sprint campaigns, and I'll show you one right here. But what to notice here, if you compare this to things like you saw in the beginning from Squatty Potty, Poo-Pouri, chat books, and the likes, you're going to see there's not nearly as much branding built into this, meaning there's not as much humor, there's not as much character development, there's not as much here to make this memorable. But it's very, very focused on the sale. So if you were to go back to that spectrum between direct response and traditional branding, this would lean much heavier towards direct response. And that's intentional. It's because at this point in the process, we just need sales. We need those sales to come in the door because that's what's going to allow us to build the brand later. So go ahead and watch this. It's about 2 minutes long, and you'll see what we mean by sprint. It's much cheaper, lower budget than what you saw with Squatty Potty and Poo-Pouri, but it's still very effective at selling.
Do you suffer from a condition known as sloppy sleeves? Do your rolled sleeves fall down because you live on a planet with gravity and children? The problem is many of our shirts are made from slippery fabrics like silk or satin and won't stay rolled. And even when we do get our sleeves to roll, they just look sloppy. That's why you need Cuffed Up. It's a chic, low-profile band that keeps your sleeves rolled up and fashionable all day long. Every Cuffed Up band is designed using an ultra-thin steel core that pops to seamlessly form to your arm or leg. And with the non-slip silicone cover, Cuffed Up is strong enough to hold denim, yet grippy enough for slippery silks. So now you can trust that the style you choose in the morning will last all day. We're so confident that Cuffed Up will give you a long-lasting and stylish look that if you don't completely love it, you can send it back for a full refund. Plus, Cuffed Up comes in a variety of colors, so it can blend with light and dark fabrics, giving you confidence for that presentation at work, going out with friends, or that hot date tonight. So if you want to look good and don't want to spend your day fidgeting, adjusting, and re-rolling, click the link or go to cuffedup.com and order your pair today. Want to wear your favorite shirt in several styles? Get Cuffed Up. Have sleeves or pant legs that are too long and you don't want to pay for tailoring? Get Cuffed Up. Or maybe they're too short and don't quite fit right. Get cuffed up. Want your man's forearms to be irresistibly sexy? Get him cuffed up. Cuffed Up has been featured in Indie Style and praised by Real Simple magazine as a smart product to make your life easier. Now, I'm not saying that it's a magical band that will transform your life, but yes, it is a magic band that will transform your life. This is what happens when real people try Cuffed Up for the first time.
I think this thing is genius.
It's literally not moving.
This is so cute. This is wonderful.
Look, sleeves can suck, but it's not your fault. Maybe you're too tall, too short, wash dishes, cook food, have kids. Okay, that one is your fault, but I get it. You want to look good, and with Cuffed Up, now you can. So click the link or go to cuffedup.com and transform your style today.
So notice all the elements of a great sale are there. You know, think about when you're pitching someone on your product. Usually what do you cover, right? You want to grab their attention, and then you want to present a problem and a solution, build some credibility, overcome concerns, and ultimately give them a call to action. Click now to buy. It's all there in a sprint campaign, right? But you can see that all the branding elements are still missing at this point, because your goal is just get those sales coming in the door. And if you get this right, this is where your sales should start scaling up. Oftentimes, companies can use this type of advertising to get their first, call it $2, $3, $4 million per year coming in the door, and that's when the really fun branding stuff gets to start. So that's where we say, okay, once you've achieved that level of sales, now you can really lean into sales plus brand. And that's where we go into the hero campaign work. And you'll notice in our hero campaigns, we're trying to build a brand character and a brand universe. Why is that important? If you think about it, the most effective communication tool in the history of humanity is storytelling. So our ancestors passed information from generation to generation by telling each other stories. And that's what our brains are wired to remember. And so when we can create a brand character that becomes part of our customer's hero's journey, our customer is on their own journey, they want to be the hero in their own story, and when our brand character can become their guide in that story, then the chances that they remember you and remember your brand go up infinitely. And so that's the goal here, is to create that brand character and the universe that they live in and the brand voice. Do you use humor? Do you use more of a sentimental type vibe? That's where you get to establish what that brand is and how people remember you. And that's when the needle really starts to move. You go from your $2 to $4 million per year up into the tens of millions of dollars per year, like you saw with many of these brands here. And then from there we go into, you can start to play in the strictly branding space. Think about a Nike who never will do a call to action. Like Nike started out in the 70s as Phil Knight running from shoe store to shoe store, just basically doing door-to-door sales, right? But over time, they've built a brand that's so strong, you will never see a Nike ad that says, hurry, click now while supplies last. They don't do that anymore. They don't have to, because now they can just focus on the brand building, the brand storytelling. What is their brand all about? It's about celebrating athletes and athletics, right? So in our world, so Chapbooks, for instance, we did the hero video to establish the brand, and then we do a whole bunch of sidekick videos to continue building that brand. This is where you get to know the character better. This is where the character story develops over time. In other worlds, you can think of like Dos Equis, most interesting man in the world. They establish a character, and then over time, they build that character so you really get to know him. And then when they retire him and bring in a new Dos Equis man, you hate him because you were so connected to the original one. Or there's all sorts of other brand characters that you can think of that would fit that as well. But the fun thing here is this is where you really get to go into the brand storytelling. And this is where I want to tie it back to what Melanie talked about. So in your earned distribution, this is the work that you're doing on all your social media channels. This is the work that you're doing on your email list. Oftentimes, it can feel kind of overwhelming to look at, a Gary Vee, for instance, who's posting like 20 pieces of content on every single social channel under the sun, and he's constantly telling us that we should be doing the same thing. And sometimes our heads are spinning and we're going like, I don't even know where to start. I don't know how to attack all of this. And I think it's really important for us to acknowledge and understand that our earned distribution strategy, it's okay for it to start out small. As those first sales come in the door, we should say, okay, what's the earned distribution strategy that I want to start with? And then over time, as my sales grow, I want to increase that strategy so that eventually you grow into that whole entire matrix that Melanie showed us. You don't have to start with that whole entire matrix. You get to build up to that over time. And when you combine that paid strategy that we went over with the earned strategy, you get a compounding effect in your brand building that happens over time. And it's very, very powerful. But you do it in such a way that the economic engine you built supports it the whole entire way. So you're not out hiring a Gary Vee crew to have like your camera dude following you around and a team of like 6 people cutting up content and all that stuff in the background, and next thing you know, you're burning like $50K per month on your content team when you don't have $50K per month to put towards that. Here's a word of warning though. So Snuggie, who remembers Snuggie? Handful of people. So the fact that not that many people remember Snuggie will be a testament to what I'm about to tell you. So Snuggie was one of the most successful infomercials in the history of infomercials. They sold somewhere between $300 and $500 million worth of Snuggies, depending on the source that you read. It's somewhere in that range. But here's what's crazy to me. They brought in $300 to $500 million and they never bothered to build a brand. Where is Snuggie today? The teenagers of today have no idea what Snuggie is. Only a handful of us in the room even remember what Snuggie is. So when you go through this process, when you build that economic engine, I promise you're going to be tempted to think that your business has made it. I'm spending $2 and I'm getting back $4. I'm spending $100,000 and I'm getting back $200,000. I've made it. My business is sustainable. Now I can just milk this thing. I promise if you do that, you'll end up like Snuggie. Okay? That economic engine is a very short-term thing unless you build your brand. And that's why once that economic engine hits, that's the important time to say, okay, I've got the economic engine now. How do I take a percentage of this revenue coming in the door and reinvest it into brand building, both through what Melanie talked about, the earned distribution strategy where you're creating content on all the platforms, as well as a paid strategy like what I showed you with sprints and heroes and sidekicks. Now, the opposite can also be a problem. So who's familiar with pets.com? Okay, so they're the famous case study from the original, .com bust. So they're a startup out of Silicon Valley that has this concept of we're going to sell pet supplies online, and they go out to the venture capitalists and they raise millions of dollars to get this thing off the ground. And they say, okay, we've raised millions of dollars, now it's time to advertise. What do? They go and buy Super Bowl ads. Right? It's like brand new startup already wants to act and play like the big boys. And so they spend millions of dollars on these Super Bowl campaigns, and of course within just a few short months they're out of business. And so I think this is an extreme case study that's important for us to remember. We don't need to be doing more than what our own economic engine can support. We don't need to be thinking about, I need a hero video today, or I need to fill that whole entire matrix of content today. you do what your economic engine allows you to do with the resources that you have, and then by growing that over time, you grow into the brand that people know and remember. I want to share one more story with you before I'm done. So, in the beginning, I mentioned I'm a high school dropout. It was my junior year of high school. I came home from school one day, and I was really frustrated, and I went to my dad, and I was like, Dad, this is a total waste of my time. I feel like high school is daycare for teenagers. And he looked at me, and he kind of gave me this little scowl, and he goes, so leave. And that was not what I was expecting to hear. I was expecting him, to be like my high school counselor or whatever and give me a speech on how important high school is. And instead, he just goes, so leave. And I'm kind of shocked, and I was like, what? He goes, if they're wasting your time, then do something about it. Don't complain to me. Do something about it. And that was the first time that thought had ever been planted in my head. That was the first time I ever realized that there was even a possibility of taking a different route. And it got the wheels turning in my head. And at the time, the thing that I was most passionate about was cars. Like, I loved cars. Read car magazines, read car books, worked on cars. I just loved everything about cars. And I was so passionate about it, I decided that's where I wanted to put my time and focus. So I dropped out of high school and went full-time into studying automotive repair. And I ended up getting to compete in automotive repair competitions, and I competed at the state level and won, and then they sent me to the national level, and I took second place in the nation at fixing cars, of all things. And with that came thousands of dollars of prize tools and scholarships and all of these things that set me up on a springboard to launch my career from. And I look back now, I'm a dad, I have 4 kids, and I look back now at what my dad told me, and I realize that was like really bold and outside the box for him to say to me. Like, I would be really scared to say something like that to my kids. But I am so grateful that he had the guts to just be like, you know what, you do you. And he supported me. He wasn't worried about what will my friends think about my, my grease monkey mechanic son who's a high school dropout. He was just thinking about me. And I feel like in business and in marketing, sometimes we need that same kick in the pants to think about, you don't have to do things the way that you've just always thought that they should be done. You know how you get into these mindsets of like, okay, this is how it's supposed to be done, and you just kind of do it because you're supposed to do it. That same jolt that my dad provided me and showed me, hey, you can think differently, you can act differently, there's different ways to approach this. Sometimes we need that in business and marketing as well. So I hope that something you've heard today can provide some amount of that kick in the pants, some amount of that jolt to say, you know what, I don't have to keep going the way that I've always done this. I can try something different. And with that, I hope that gives you permission to go try something new, something different, something wild. And I hope you're incredibly successful with it. Thank you.